Yes, live activities now and in the near future. Rough guide to an Apple beta feature. I'm not sure who of you know about live activities. My plan today is to explain what they are, how we are intent to start using them within Catawiki, and yeah, go into the technical details, of course. So to start off, a short story about how I came to learn about the live activities and how I got to this place today. It was 6th of June 2022. I think most of you will probably have been watching the Platform State of the Union during WWDC. And then they started mentioning stuff about live updates. And I thought, this might be interesting for our app. What is this about? Then they started showing these nice graphs. On your lock screen, you can see the live status of activities or stuff that you are doing. And we really thought, I really thought, this is something that we could use at Catawiki. We are having auctions, they have an end time, and the prices keep increasing, especially people that have already placed bids. They would be very interested in keeping close eye on what is going on there. But then I was checking the rest of WWDC, no videos, no docs. They did mention in some note this will be part of a later update in iOS 16 later this year. But there was simply nothing. Well, docs, not so surprised that there's no docs with Apple, but still no videos. That was a bit of a surprise for me. Then, luckily, in end of July, there was in the developer beta 4 of iOS 16, they announced live activities are now available in the beta. Still, they mentioned it will be for a later version of iOS 16. But then I thought, yes, now I can finally dive into it. So I started playing around with the SDKs. Nice that there was actual documentation about this. Still no videos. There are still today, I think, no videos on how to use this, which is, well, still a bit interesting for Apple, I think. But yeah, there is documentation. So I started diving into the documentation and to the app and playing around with it. Then iOS 16 got released, but there was no more live activities because it was not available in the first version of iOS 16. And also, I was wondering, so should I keep using the old version of the old beta version now, and how long does it stay active, and can I actually keep using it, or when does the actual release of live activities come? Then two days later, the 16.1 beta got live, and they announced again that live activities will be part of this. They also announced it will be part of the 16.1 release. Still not sure, of course, when this will actually go live, but there is again a beta that I could play around with. So I started picking my old project that I was playing around with, putting it in the 16.1 beta, and it crashed, or basically didn't compile. And so I was thinking, so they completely changed the whole API. The interesting part was that I noticed that the things were failing on missing parameters for Dynamic Island, which was, of course, just announced for the iPhone 14 Pro. So that was kind of interesting, because then I thought, oh, this is actually a feature that also will start utilizing the Dynamic Island. So how does this work together? Let's dive into it a little bit more. I was glad that the docs were at that point also updated. So there was actually also the documentation of how to work with this Dynamic Island. Yeah, so that's the story. So this was what was it, last week, 2 weeks ago? Now I had 2 weeks to prepare the rest to make sure that to have a presentation today. So to start off with the basics, what are live activities in iOS? So basically, they are lock screen widgets and dynamic island widgets that contain live data. So what they already showcase is deliveries that you can get live updates on to know when it will arrive. Your workout activity or match for a sports match that you want to follow and make sure that to have the up-to-date information about who scored and what is going on there. I saw an example of a flight tracker. So in very short, it looks like a widget. It's actually built like a widget. So if you are already familiar with Widget Kit, it will be very similar to build this thing. It behaves as a widget and kind of like a notification, because it's on your lock screen in between your notifications. Also, the way to update them is partly similar to notifications. It's scheduled from within the app by the user, which is different than a widget and also different than a push notification because those are just, well, not from within the app or not scheduled by the user but pushed from our backend. But this one you have to explicitly have the app in the foreground and then trigger a live activity. The user can have multiple live activities. They can have multiple live activities per app even at the same time. But there is a limit, and Apple, being Apple, says we don't tell you the limit, but there might be a limit, so you might get a rejection whenever you try to create one. But they say it's a fair amount. It's a live activity can be active up to 8 hours, then it gets automatically ended by the system. And after it gets ended, it can stay up to in your lock screen for up to 4 hours. You can, as a developer, choose to remove it earlier, or the user can also remove it earlier. It will be introduced later this year, iOS 16.1. I guess that it will still be this year, but we will. Who knows how many 16.0 point somethings we will get before. It will not be on iPadOS. It's an iPhone only feature. And it has special features on the dynamic island devices. 14 Pro comes to mind, and future devices probably as well. So why should we build this live activity? So I've been thinking about this, and we've also had discussions with some designers here at Catawiki about what is the use case, and the most obvious use case is following the end of an auction, because if a user placed a bid, they want to keep close tabs on what happens. If they get outbid, they might want to overbid. We want to also stimulate that, of course. Our auctions have a semi-fixed end time. So they have an end time, but it can get extended if someone places a bid just before the ending time. Then other people get the opportunity to overbid them. So it gets extended by 90 seconds or something. The price is variable, of course, because it goes up. Users want to be informed about this as soon as possible. This is something that we know that there are users. A lot of users are actually in the last minutes just watching our object screen to see when they have to tap and try to last minute place a bid and stuff like that. And there might also be other potential use cases, for example, in our shipping process, or perhaps for selling objects. There is a whole procedure that the sellers go through to get their objects approved. So perhaps there is also some opportunity there for live activities, but we wanted to focus first on this auction scenario. So how to set up a live activity widget. So the widget part, if you're already familiar with Widget Kit, as I mentioned, this should be pretty straightforward. You cannot actually reuse the same widget that you already have for as a regular widget. You cannot reuse it directly as a live activity because it's a different configuration. But you can, of course, reuse the views in whatever way you want. There is not really a limitation there. So what you basically have to do, you create a widget bundle and then you add a new, or you already have a widget bundle, you create a new live activity widget, or if you don't have a bundle, you just create a live activity widget. And one thing that is important is the dynamic island layout has to be provided. Actually, it won't compile if you don't supply this. That's what happened actually when I was trying, which is kind of interesting. And also I think Apple wants to promote that you actually give this consistent experience for the users. So to set up, first, of course, you need to install the latest betas. Having an iPhone 14 Pro is nice to have, but I noticed you can test most of the stuff in simulator. Well, iPhone 14 Pro is anyway nice to have, I would say. But so creating the widget extension, it's the same thing. You create an extension. You say I want a widget extension. You give it a name. Then you add to your info plist in your app, you add the NS supports live activities, and you have to put it to yes, of course. Then you start by creating your data model, basically. So it's called Activity Attributes Protocol that you have to implement. And that protocol contains your static fields of your activity. Like in this case, a lot, by the way, a lot is basically the objects that we sell. It has a name and an ID, and that is static. That doesn't change throughout the life cycle of the live activity. And then there is a variable content state that you have to provide, which is the dynamic part, the stuff that updates live. So our closing time can change, the current value can change, the bidding status can change, like is this person on top, or is the person outbid? And then for the updates, there is a max of 4 KB payload that you can send. This is the same as for push notifications, I believe. And so you cannot really push a lot of like image data or something live. They say you can push image data for the static part, but I will get back to that. Then having the data model, you have to configure the widget, which works with an activity configuration, which is similar to widget configuration. But yeah, it has some specific aspects for it. So first, in the activity configuration, it defines your lock screen view. And then the second part is defining the dynamic island view. And well, it takes, of course, the context, and the context is your attributes and your current state. Then to first dive into the lock screen view, this is basically a regular Swift UI view, so you can do whatever you're used to do that, or with your other widget. It's quite similar to System Medium widget, but not quite. The height is a little bit different, I noticed. So the previewing is a bit tricky. I tried using the preview contact with System Medium because it's similar, but then sometimes it wasn't even working at all, and sometimes it was working, but then it's slightly higher, and then so I ended up just running stuff in the simulator or on device to actually test the stuff. Apple says the height can be 160 points, and if it's higher, it can be truncated, which is another nice vagueness, but I think they were saying try to keep it to 160 points. And there are some limitations around animation. You cannot do continuous animations on your lock screen widgets because it's not actually running, it's just static. So things like with animation and animation modifiers are ignored, and it instead uses some system animation whenever the state changes. So whenever you push an update, then it does some animations, and you can configure those using the content transition modifier. So what it then looks like in practice for the lock screen, so I defined it as my activity view. It of course has the state, the static state attributes, and then the state in this case, and then there's just your body with your whole thing. Some interesting parts are here. I added a link. In the expanded view, you can have multiple tab areas for different links. The documentation says that you should use widget URL for the complete thing, but for the lock screen, that doesn't seem to work. It might be just a bug in the beta, I hope, but